Sports come back, let me ask you this. Just give me an opinion. What do you think it would be like to call an NFL football game potentially with no one in the stands? What have you even thought about what that might be? Because I'm sure you got the players, you got the fans, you got the press box, you feed off of all of the energy of the stadium.
Yes.
I wonder what it would be like to call a game without anybody being there if that's what ultimately happens.
You take your cue in terms of your voice dynamics, and it's really more of an instinctive thing. You don't really think about it, but you naturally measure your voice up against that energy wave. We've talked about it on your show through the years, how you go from an arena like the Final Four, and then a few days later you're at Augusta, completely different sound. There's not that same kind of feedback that you're hearing. It'll take some adjusting, there's no question. But, I think we'll adjust to that pretty quickly as a viewer. I did hear the other day, I was doing a show with Joe Buck, and he suggested that there might be some pumped-in crowd sound that might accompany the broadcast. I have not talked to anybody at CBS, so I'm not going to speak to that. But that was just an interesting idea that Joe threw out there. Now, I have done a few events where it's felt like there was no crowd there. You had nothing to play off of, okay? I will tell you, I've done a golf tournament where there was no crowd.
Really?
In 2012 at Congressional, Tigers event. It was in the D.C. area at the time. There had been a tornado overnight, I think Friday going into Saturday, knocked down some trees. So the weekend, I believe it was both days, and maybe it was just the one of the two rounds. There were no spectators. No one was allowed on the golf course except for the players and their caddies and some television personnel. And once we got into the rhythm and flow of it, because this was golf, though, a quieter sport. Once we got into the rhythm and flow of it, I'd like to go back and see what those shows look like.
Yeah, be interesting.
Now, here's an interesting one for you. NCAA basketball tournament. The first day. We all love that first day. When you have 4 games at one site on one day from basically noon until midnight. Oftentimes, the noon game has such a sparse turnout. I'm talking maybe a couple of hundred people, because your fan base, for whatever reason, whatever the matchup, it depends on the matchup, hasn't traveled from the East Coast, let's say, to Boise. And Boise is actually starting before noon. And the bigger games, at least the sexier matchups, are coming up later in the day. And I've called the number of NCAA games that I have called them studio games. They could play the game in a studio because at that moment, it's a television sport. Now, as the NCAA builds, we reduce the number of teams and the stakes get higher, and fan bases get behind their squads as they win a couple of games. Those stands are always filled. But I've had many, many years of broadcasting the NCAA tournament where on the opening day, you might catch a matchup where it feels like you're doing a game in front of no fans. And I got to tell you, you call it just like you always do.
I just wonder what it's going to be like when we're on the receiving end. But now that you bring it up, I think about it all the time. I watch NCAA first game. Hey, we just tipped off. There's nobody here yet. Yep. I just want sports to come back, whether it's with fans, without fans. I want them to be back on television. I think sports, Jim, are such an important part of the U.S. economy. We don't really necessarily always think about it. But, it's the players on the field that bring the fans to the stadiums, that put the popcorn people out there and the ushers, and then the parking attendants, and all of this trickle down. And then it's on television, which means there's lots and lots of people working on television. By the way, it's also on radio. There's people there. And then there's advertisers and companies. I mean, sports, this is why, to me, President Trump is having meetings with the commissioners, because it's like, for us to get back to some form of normalcy, ultimately, sports will play its role.
Well, it's a great point. What you're saying is it's bigger than the games. The games trigger all kinds of economic fallout positively, when we have things operating as normal. Here's one for you. Take the football season, okay? No fans or whatever. Can you imagine what the ratings are going to be like for those games?
Right.
I mean,
everybody will be watching.
Look at this. I mean, I don't hear a lot of talk about it. But Hollywood, you're a Hollywood guy.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay.
I always thought you'd be a tremendous character actor in one of those like Starsky and Hutch type shows.
I got to get a cool mustache.
But there is no, I mean, unless I'm completely misguided here, there can't be any fresh original programming anytime soon. We'd be approaching what they call the upfront season right now, where the networks roll out the shows for the fall. And usually about this time they start laying episodes in the can. But it's not just the over-the-air broadcast networks. It's all of these, Amazon Primes and Hulus and Netflixes. And like, where's the programming coming from? They've been shut down. And they're going to be shut down in all likelihood for a while, unless you can shoot a bunch of scenes with people 6 feet apart. How do you do that? How do you have a story? Maybe you go out and create some programming with one actor, one character in the show. As long as all your people that are shooting it are keeping their appropriate distances from one another. But I don't see any fresh programming. So now it's Sunday night, and you're sitting at home, and there's no fans, but you've got Kansas City against Tampa Bay.
Oh,
that is a matchup this season, by the way. Mahomes at Brady. So that's the game. There are no fans down at the pirate ship in Tampa. But meanwhile, on your broadcast networks, rerunning for the third or fourth time, there's whatever it is, NCIS La Jolla. And
that's a tough show, man. Those are mean streets.
The mean streets of La Jolla. What are you going to watch? I mean, the football ratings could be pretty large, I would think.